And we were talking here for a fair amount of time. And then what we would usually do on a nice night, we would go down to the pool, which I always, think is about the nicest place on the property. I don't know if the chairs were like this or not, but I mean, they're probably something like this. And we were both right here. And the dogs would come over, and we were just talking and finishing our drinks. And then she said, I gotta go in because I've got the conference call in the morning. And she started walking out that way. And I stayed right here. Don't think anything special to her, certainly not thinking this is the last time I'm going to see her. I said goodnight, I'll be up a little bit later. And I stayed here, and she walked. And the last I saw her was when I was there, and she was just walking here. That's it. That was the last I saw Kathleen alive. No, she was alive when I found her, but barely.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, I'll try not to steal everybody's thunder here, but we just saw baseline. Now, that was bad because he steps right out the door and right into a bear pit. What he does is when he walks through the door, now he's been meticulous with his details, and she suddenly appears. He doesn't say she came out. He simply says, and
we were talking here.
So he skipped over some time. There might have been something happened, Mark, to your point about why the dishes were left. Something happened. And he then says, we were talking for some time. There's a pause, not in his baseline. So there's a gap for a fair amount of time. Now, my interrogator brain would immediately go, about what? About what? Because something's hot that's happening right here. First time I watched this video, I was like, ding, 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 we got a problem on the deck. Something's going on. And then he says something, and this word could mean that it never happened. And in my initial pause, I thought it never happened, but now I changed my opinion. What we would usually do on a nice night, he says, and what we call usually is like honestly or any other thing, a push-pull word. Why usually? Why not just tell me what you did instead of what you usually would do? And then he goes back to describing the pool as being the nicest area, and he goes back to his normal baseline, lots of details, walking. Then he goes back into storytelling mode. He goes over, we were here, the dogs would have come over here, so that dogs always do this thing, and it's a repeatable pattern for him. Then he says, we were just talking and finishing our drinks, pregnant words. Look, words of omission, as Joe Navarro and Jack Schaefer call it, verbal bridging, or I call it time hiding. And then, lip compression, jaw works, and then he says, she says, I got to go in because I got to make a call in the morning. But he doesn't say it like he usually does. He does a lilt at the end, as if he's asking for approval. There's a total lack of eye contact during this time. Might mean nothing, might mean something. It's simply him moving around. And then he says, and that's the last time I saw her alive.
No, she was alive when I found her, but barely.
So lots of inconsistency with his storytelling brain going on here. He's a small chunker. He's giving you lots of details. His word patterns bothered me the first time I listened to it until I went back through and figured out he's a guy who says would have been for something that happens all the time. When it's something active, it is usually using a verbal noun like drinking, or talking. When it's something that is iffy, then he's actually using a verb and a past tense verb. So lots of word patterns, lots of things going on. That lip compression, the verbal bridging around the topic made me really red flag. If I were sitting there, I'd be all over him. Chase, what do you got?
Great points. I think when he was inside the house, I'm not sure, and we all disagree sometimes. I'm not sure we're seeing baseline. I think we're seeing storytelling at a masterful level that is potentially untrue. And I'm hesitant to call that baseline, but I think that some of these are the ways that he normally speaks. but we're back to vague answers when he says usually. And I think the word usually is a way that he softens details. And I think just seeing the dogs reminded him, because he looked at the dog a quarter of a second before he said, and the dogs would come over. And he actually says, and listen closely when you go back to this video, we would just talking.
We were just talking.
We would just talking. He didn't say we were just talking. He says we would just talking.
We were just talking.
So he even accidentally added that in there. And his eyes are no longer matching reference. When he is on message, when he knows what he's talking about and he's confident, his eyes and hands move in perfect synchronicity, as most of ours do. But now, in this part of the story, his eyes are no longer matching up with what he's talking about, where she exited, where the dogs were, where the chairs were. His eyes are not moving where they were. The last I saw Kathleen, he says this, his body's open. He's holding a leash in one hand, his other hand's out there. As Mark would say, his hands are down in the truth plane. They're opened up. And his realization of his mistake causes an instantaneous chin drop, then a pointing. And he says, no, she was alive when I found her, which is sudden closure. His hands pull all the way in and close in front of his soft belly, which I'm sure Mark will expand on. I hope Mark expands on it because he says it more eloquently than I do. But at the end, when he's talking about how these details get mixed up so easily, he's talking about all these details, but that's not a big deal. And he's saying that it's easy to mix these things up, and people tend to do that back and forth mixing gesture, like a laundry machine gesture. When they want to communicate, that's easily misunderstood by anybody. And some people do this habitually, like even some famous public speakers like Brian Tracy. But this guy does not have it in his baseline. It's not there. So I think we're seeing deception here, not that he's guilty of the crime, but that he is making up a majority of the story here. Scott?
I didn't think he went to the pool till I heard Greg talking about that. I thought when he said we would have gone down to the pool, I was under the impression they didn't go down to the pool. From that point, I don't think they got outside. I think whatever might have started there in the TV room when they're watching TV. And then she was going upstairs and he caught her there, and whatever happened to her happened right then. And he's just making that other stuff up because he's going through, he's very relaxed. He's on his own turf because he says when he's out, we would have. So my impression was before Greg went through all that and before you were talking about that, Chase, was he didn't even make it down to the pool. I think he tagged her before they got down there. But then thinking about, you're right, the way he's constructing those sentences, that makes me think maybe he was down there as well, because he does try to back up and save himself when he says, no, wait, I saw her again. Well, alive, but not so much, or whatever the term was there. So yeah, you guys totally nailed all I got in there, and I'll leave it at that. So,
well, and the only thing, Chase, I think when we talk about baseline, when we say baseline, I'm saying his storytelling baseline, because we don't know what his personality is. We just know what we're seeing on video, right? That's
good point. And Scott, I think what you said is 100% plausible. It's definitely
for sure.
Definitely
I thought
fits
the same
inside
thing
of what's going on.
I totally think I'm the same. I don't think they went outside and down to the pool at all. And here's why. I think, Chase, you're right. He's looking around that environment and he's picking up cues and he's putting them into the story. He does it when he sees the cushions are not quite straight. That's kind of interesting, is it? Because he isn't used to soft furnishings around the place. And when stuff is out of place, like that triggers him. So he's like, oh, those could have been like this, or they could have been a bit more like this, or the dogs came down. He's making this one up on the fly, I think. And part of that, I think, and also, Scott, he's leading everybody away from the crime. That's what he's doing. He's like, should we have a look outside? Should we have a look down at the at the pool and I'll start making up a story about how we went down there. He's leading everybody off on a whole different story. Let's just have a look at all the fillers in there. And Greg, you're often talking about this hiding time thing. And, and if somebody said, that I'd be on that, I'd be, up in their grill. Well, on this guy, you would literally be fixed to his grill like some piece of roadkill. You would be through the grill on this guy, because here's what happens. And then, and then, and I stayed right here. And I stayed, and she left, and the last, and she, and that's it. It's full of filler. He's making stuff up as he goes along. It's extraordinary. Just go back, watch that again, and just see how much filler is there and how much he's using us to lead us literally down the garden path, if that is a metaphor that works for the US audience that we have. Certainly any of the UK audience will understand being led down the garden path. He's literally taking us to the bottom of the garden on this one. Chase, to your point of just explaining a bit of evolutionary behavioral psychology 101, or certainly my 101 to people, when you see people protect this belly area, we are descendant from ground-dwelling mammals, not apes up in trees. That was just something that the Victorians did to Charles Darwin to really annoy him. So he'd go, will you read the book? So we're descendant from ground-dwelling mammals. As the plains of southern Africa opened up, as climate change happened back then and the forests of Africa receded, the ground-dwelling mammal now has an advantage to standing upright, and you get upright hominids. When the hominid goes upright on a plane, it's now got an advantage because it can see a distance up to several miles, be able to see prey or mate or a predator coming. But now you're up, like there's a disadvantage in that this area of the body is now very, very vulnerable. We do not evolve ribs all the way down because we want to be able to duck and run and be able to run long distance. So this remains vulnerable. And therefore, often when we're truly telling the truth, we will open up in this area. Or if you want to convince somebody that you're being honest, you can open up in that area, and it will convince most people, including yourself. There's a whole difference that happens in your brain stem with various neurotransmitters and levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide changing as you open up here. So as you open up here, it feels more honest. As you close around this area, you feel more protected. There, little evolutionary behavioral psychology 101. There you go.
Excellent.
And we were talking here for a fair amount of time. And then what we would usually do on a nice night, we would go down to the pool, which I always, think is about the nicest place on the property. I don't know if the chairs were like this or not, but I mean, they're probably something like this. And we were both right here. And the dogs would come over, and we were just talking and finishing our drinks. And then she said, I got to go in because I've got the conference call in the morning. And she started walking out that way. And I stayed right here. Don't think anything special to her. Certainly not thinking this is the, last time I'm going to see her. I said goodnight. I'll be up a little bit later. And I stayed here, and she walked. And the last I saw her was when I was there, and she was just walking here. That's it. That was the last I saw Kathleen alive. No. She was alive when I found her, but barely.
If you like this video, get the full body language breakdown and analysis on our main channel by clicking this video right here.